Hi, everyone, and welcome to you all. I'm so glad to be here with you, and I was just having a fun time looking at all the people who have joined us from all around Florida. It's really interesting on these programs. We get people from all around the state, all around the country, and I think it's compelling and wonderful that we do have a lot of Florida folks. I know we're going to be talking about Florida law, but for those of you who are not from Florida, know that our topic today has relevance, and these kinds of laws, similar laws, sometimes they're called vacature, are in other, not exactly the same, but kind of similar concept and reason for them, are in other parts of the country. So even if you're not in Florida, you're going to learn a lot about these kinds of laws and what they and what they can do to help survivors. I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me go back and start and say hi again. I'm Robin Hessler Thompson. I'm the executive director of STAC, or the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. We are located here in the Panhandle of Florida, in Northwest Florida. And we have a footprint that encompasses 8 counties that all surround Leon County, our capital. We do work, and our reason for existing is the work we do to assist trafficking survivors. And although we do programs like this, we do tons of education, we do all kinds of outreach. The reason we do that is to support survivors in what has happened with them as they might come forward, as what is happening to them now. And then we also work to do prevention of human trafficking. As more people understand what it is, they can do more to stop it earlier. Which again, I'll talk about why that's important for this program today as well. So we do care management for all trafficked persons, whether it's sex or labor trafficking, whether it's adults or minors, whether immigrants or U.S. born U.S. citizens. We are here for everyone. And that is also really important too. Just as a footnote, sometimes programs just focus on sex trafficking or maybe just labor trafficking. But what we've learned over time, of course, is that both can happen to a single person, as well as one or the other. So we do that for services, and that service can be anything from helping provide housing, transportation, food, basic needs assistance, as well as long-term care, including counseling and others. We've got grant funds and other funding that, fingers crossed, will continue on in the near future to help survivors. And we also do, again, all of this education for the very purpose of it informs survivors, it informs the people who are contact points for survivors, so that we can do more to support them. Next slide, please. And look at all the information is still coming in from everyone. I really would love it if you all would bookmark our website to register. You went on our website, but I really hope you have time to do more than register, which I love that you do that, of course. But we've got lots of materials. We have information that can help caregivers and youth. We have agency specific information. We've got lots on there, including our event page, which, by the way, we take time to curate national programs and programs from around the state that are great. And so go on the website. You'll see more stuff coming up for September from some of our national friends and colleagues. Really encourage you to visit the website as often as you can. When you go on, it'll ask you to join the newsletter. Do that. You might get 2 emails from us a month, just telling you about these programs and other stuff going on. So please join our newsletter. Please take advantage of lots and lots of free information there. Okay, next slide. I don't know how many of you are podcast people, but we have a podcast, and this is a podcast that we only speak with survivors of trafficking. And this is not to hear exploitative stories that I think all of us have unfortunately had to see happen. But what I mean by that is very often survivors are often asked to only talk about really literally the worst things that have happened to them. Instead, this podcast focuses on what we can learn from experts who have been there and who can help dispel myths and misinformation about trafficking and really help build our own knowledge and our community's strengths to be there for survivors. So it is actually a series of very interesting and enjoyable conversation. And I encourage you to take out your phones if you feel like it, grab that QR code, and as they say, subscribe, rate, and review. Next slide. Those of you who are in the nonprofit world and maybe others, you are probably facing what we're facing, which is an uncertain economic reality. We don't know if grants that we have are going to continue. We don't know if funders are going to be able to continue funding. We've seen a drop in private giving because people, are seeing are uncertain or don't know, what's next in terms of the economy and financial security. So these programs are brought to you free. We want to keep it that way, and that's why we ask you every time we have one of these programs to consider a gift of any size. We really appreciate it. We like to work hard to bring these programs to you, and your donations always make a huge difference. So thank you for that, and thanks for considering making a gift so that we can keep going with these programs. All right, next slide. Okay, our presenters today. So where do I start to talk about Brent Woody? And I don't know if you noticed in the chat, Brent, somebody said they're your biggest fan, and I'm happy to arm wrestle that person. But I count myself among at least the top 10 because Brent Woody, who has done two programs for us, I believe, already on this topic, is a leader in this field. And so if you talk to anybody from other programs in other states, they'll and you say you're from Florida, they'll say, well, you need to talk to Brent Woody about this issue, because you have led the nation, and you certainly, Brent, and Brent's bio is in our on our website, but I just want to say that he has been the reason we have the laws that we have, as strong as we have those laws, dealing with this issue and related issues. And I was happy to be reminded, Brent, of all the other things that you've done, and that your wife, Pamela, also as a survivor advocate, has put together to support survivors of trafficking all these years, beginning in 2012 is what we have down here. And so, Brent, welcome again. You are the expert on this, and I just have to say, I think that because you have been able to walk with so many survivors in this fairly esoteric legal procedure, you probably know more about human trafficking, what it looks like, what survivors go through, than almost anybody. So welcome again, Brent, to our program. The next person I'd like to introduce is someone who I've had the honor of just meeting, to as we've planned this program, Danielle Lennox. So Danielle, welcome to the program as well. Danielle is with the Broward State Attorney's Office, 17th Judicial Circuit. She has been active in terms of this issue of human trafficking for, I want to say, over about 10 years. Is that accurate, or is that maybe overestimating it a little bit?
I've been a prosecutor for about 10 years, but I've been working in human trafficking for about 5.
Okay, so half of that time. But I would say that all those years before, no doubt, have been informative to what you're doing now in the field of human trafficking. So if you look at her bio, you'll also see that she's a leader in her community, head of the human trafficking division, responsible for these cases, and also has been dedicated to this work, receiving honors and recognition. And I've I've seen you on some social media with your local task force and some of the other things that you've had going down there. So just another little small insight. Even though the three of us are lawyers, I will promise you that we will be speaking in down to earth way. So I know that you've got a lot of people from around the state who are not lawyers, as well as some that are. Um, but I know we're making this real for you. The other thing I want to remind you all is that we do have 2 hours of CLE credit that are available. We'll post the CLE info at the end of the program. And then you'll be able to kind of make sure you can apply and get that CLE credit. 2 hours of free CLE. I think that's another reason to consider if you'd like to support us in our work so that we can keep these kinds of programs going for you. So that's our speakers. Brent, if you wanted to begin to pull your slides up, I want to do just a little intro on the topic. I wanted to just share with you something about expungement. Um, we know that human trafficking doesn't happen in a vacuum. That when someone is arrested or someone is convicted of a human trafficking related charge, who has committed that crime, if you will, while they were being trafficked, that is a point in the story that began many, many years prior. The thing about these expungement cases, I believe, is that they help widen the lens so that we can see the realities that people who have been trafficked have faced, that, if you will, led up to the time when they had this interaction with the justice system. Um, we know that this process is really important because a survivor who has committed an act while they are being trafficked does not have free will. And really, this process is here to right injustices that have happened and that probably started happening many decades before. So that's why I'm always grateful to hear Brent, especially, and I'm looking forward to Danielle as well, talk about these cases, talk about what's happening, talk about what has happened to survivors and how this legal process can help right some of the wrongs that have been going on for a very, very long time. So with that, I will thank you again, Brent and Danielle, for being with us today and turn it over to you.
It's really good uh, to be back and talk about this issue again. Um, Especially super excited to have Danielle involved. I've never done one of these presentations with a prosecutor, sort of along with a prosecutor, even though we work with prosecutors all the time. There's never been one that wanted to do this. So I'm super excited about that. And maybe just a little bit intimidated. So anyway, but we're all good. So Justice Restoration Center, and many of you are familiar with our work, but um, we basically provide no-cost legal services to exclusively to survivors of human trafficking and to victims of human trafficking. If you break that down into victims being those who are still being exploited, survivors being those who have come out of a situation. We have clients who are literally located all over the world. But we work with them on Florida and Tennessee legal matters. I won't go into Tennessee, but we don't have the kind of relief in Tennessee that we do in Florida, and it's something that needs to be addressed there. And I don't know if anybody from Tennessee is on the meeting, but we need advocates pushing for criminal record relief for survivors. We are part of the National Survivor Law Collective, which is a group of attorneys around the country that work in this space. There are not nearly enough of us. I mean, I believe we have 5 members, sort of charter members of the collective. We need hundreds of attorneys, right? So if there's 5, right, that's like maybe 5 states sort of represented there. It doesn't mean that there are only 5 attorneys doing human trafficking work around the country, but there are a precious few, and there are many states that have no attorneys that are available to work on trafficking related issues or to represent survivors in matters that were related to their trafficking. So we need a lot more folks involved. I'm going to put this up, Danielle. Talk about yourself.
Hi. So yes, I'm Danielle Lennox. As I said before, I've been a prosecutor for about 10 years now. I've been working in our human trafficking division for about 4.5, 5 years at this point. Yeah, so I'm in charge of all the Broward County investigations. I partner with law enforcement, search warrants, subpoenas, all of that. I file the criminal cases. And then after the filing, I keep the case. I'm in court almost every single day on my cases until it either goes to trial or it resolves. And then outside of the prosecution, I have the privilege of getting to work with Mr. Woody and Coast to Coast Legal Aid attorney Victoria Sexton, and we do human trafficking expungements. So once we get kind of through the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about what I look for, what my role is when it comes to human trafficking expungements, but we'll get there.
Thanks, Danielle. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Danielle for being such a collaborator in this process. A lot of times we do file these petitions to expunge all over the state, and we work with some great prosecutors. There's no doubt, but we certainly have some that view this process as an adversary process. So, in other words, we're coming in as a standard criminal defense lawyer trying to get somebody off from an offense, and we found this human trafficking loophole, right? And so Danielle, for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is she understands human trafficking and has that approach, is victim-centered, understands the plight of victims, and understands the law when it comes to human trafficking, and understands the law when it comes to these petitions to expunge, which I can tell you not everybody does. So I guess with that, thank you, Danielle, for being on here. And I've invited her, or not invited her, but she's free to jump in anytime and elaborate on something, correct something. This is a conversation, so we just invite her to be a part of it at any point. So many of you, there's so many advocates on this meeting, and you're going to know this stuff. I'm going to say this stuff, and you'll be like, yeah, all right, I already know this. But I'm going to say it anyway, just in case we have folks that are maybe a little bit new to this, or maybe didn't think of something, or you may think of some additional things, and put them in the chat for things that I miss. So, but what are human trafficking related legal issues? There are more than can be listed here, but some of the really common ones are the state and federal criminal arrest records, and that's mainly what we're going to be talking about today on the state side. But coerced debt and debt bondage, which are things that create legal issues once someone is out of life. Family law matters, and we particularly see custody matters so often in the family law space. Often a child may belong to a trafficker. Those sorts of situations that, again, we need attorneys who will step into that space and help work those things out. Coordination of out-of-state counsel. So a lot of our clients have out-of-state issues that we can't represent them on. So we will work to get them representation in other states. Outstanding warrants that seems like we're always grappling with a warrant that's kind of hanging out there, and maybe we can get that worked out with the state if we can figure out what the warrant's for and those kind of things. Intellectual property rights is not something that immediately comes to mind, but many survivors have created have written books or created presentations or created other t- content that is subject to intellectual property rights, copyright, trademark, things like that, and those things need to be protected. For their well, they need to be protected for anybody, but for a survivor that's moving into this space and doing work in this space, those rights need to be protected. Immigration, I'm sure I don't have to go into all the immigration challenges that are going on at the moment, but have always been going on in our T visa and U visa issues, federal tax matters, and we're seeing more of this as time goes along, where somebody is trafficked in a let's say a strip club, and the strip club 1099s the survivor for work that was done in a certain year, for $30,000. Of course, none of that money went to the survivor, went to the trafficker, and but the survivor gets a notice for a tax debt. So those are things that need to be worked out. Also, some of the things that come out of the coerced debt issue as well can have some tax implications, where the use of an identity to report income for a job and that kind of thing. So we have those matters that come up as well. There are others, and we're always discovering them, and there are sort of subsets of that list that I just went through. So if you have other situations that your clients or you, if you're a survivor, have encountered, pop those in the chat, because we'd love to know about those. Some of the other things that the Justice Restoration Center is involved in are safe prison releases, which is basically establishing a relationship with an inmate who is trafficked and is getting out in the near future or in the future, and we just try to help them get connected to a program. Some of our great programs around the state, transportation to get to that program, or maybe other services, even trauma therapy in the institution itself, some things like that, because that's a forgotten population, maybe, or just certainly not a focus when we talk about human trafficking. But so very many inmates have been trafficking victims. So we help try to coordinate trauma therapy where needed, but really, I should jump to that last one: collaborate with other service providers, because we don't provide safe housing, we don't do trauma therapy, we don't provide employment opportunities, but we really work with an incredible village of folks who do incredible work in all of these areas. So when we have the opportunity to be a conduit to get people to help, that's what we do. So if somebody calls and says, "Well, I don't have a legal matter, can you help?" We will try to help them anyway. So involved in legislative and policy advocacy in Florida and Tennessee, and on the federal side, and have done a good bit of consulting with other states, mainly on criminal record relief. And we've made a lot of progress since I got involved in 2012. A number of states have some really good laws. Some I'm even parts of are just a little envious of. So we might talk about that in a second. So today, really, the focus is really expungement of Florida criminal arrest records. And I'm going to try to talk about this in a way that's, and if I don't succeed, maybe don't put that in the chat, maybe just tell me later. But I want this to be accessible to non-attorneys, but also for attorneys. I want it to be useful. There are CLE credits, so we want it to be useful for attorneys who may be wanting to navigate criminal record relief for survivors of trafficking, or at least be involved somehow. So that's what we're going to talk about. So what is the issue? Again, one of these things that many of you, in fact, I know some of you on this meeting, because I've been looking at the chat, have had these issues. And so but human trafficking commonly results in a criminal record. I think the statistic out of the Avery Center was some 90% of trafficking victims emerge from a trafficking situation with a criminal record, and I think that's particularly true in sex trafficking or forced criminality sort of situations. So you end up, what we see are prostitution offenses, many drug offenses, whether it's possession, drug sales, many things related to that, theft crimes, battery offenses, criminal traffic. We see a lot of criminal traffic. If somebody's forced to drive without a license or drive a car that doesn't have a tag. I mean, there's all kinds of situations that come up, that forced to drive when they're intoxicated, things like that, and human trafficking. So, those are the sort of classic situations where somebody's forced to traffic others. And I'm happy to say we have expunged all of these kinds of offenses as well as others. The consequences of criminal record, we all know this: employment, right? Housing, education, family law situations where somebody's seen as an offender in a family law context. The impact on immigration, so someone could be the difference between being deportable or not being deportable. Volunteering, those kind of opportunities, civic participation, voting, gun rights. I want to go back to housing though, just real quick, because the existence of a criminal record also increases the vulnerability of somebody being exploited, a survivor being exploited by a landlord or a property management company, and says, well, I know about your past, and I'll give you a place to live if you will do these things for me. And we certainly have seen that kind of situation. So many other, practical, I guess, or sort of on the ground results. And we have this situation, right, where somebody's stuck in the cycle of being trafficked, and they get arrested. And I am thinking about sex trafficking situations here, but they're arrested, so there's the shame and the trauma of arrest, but it is at least a short-term exit from the exploitation. And let's say they don't go back to a trafficker, the trafficker doesn't bond them out, but they can't get a job, they can't find housing, they end up with a lack of meaningful choices, and then they end up re-exploited. Maybe they go back into a strip club or something just to make some quick money, and that of course is a portal back into it. And I just kind of highlighted this shame piece of in all of these situations, because this is for you therapists who are on this call, I apologize for maybe mangling this, but this is just trauma after trauma after trauma, and the layers of trauma that come from arrest when it shouldn't have happened that way. And I guess we were talking about the non-legal consequences of a criminal record, the stigma and the self-esteem, re-traumatization, the triggers. We have so many clients say, I don't even want to apply for a job because I know that criminal record's going to come up, and it's going to just trigger another trauma response, feeling defeated and that sort of thing. The effects of a criminal record on family relationships, where the extended family doesn't understand, what happened, or why they have a criminal record, why they maybe need help, and that sort of thing. And even social, friendships. I have a client who we did expunge her record, and it was a significant record expunged. It took care of $100,000 in fines that she had. It was a RICO case. And 2 or 3 years later, she's in another state, gets pulled over by the police for, I don't know, tag situation or speeding or something, and they cuff her, and they're like, you're a convicted felon, and this happened because her record had not been cleared through the national database, so it still showed up, and but she was with people friends that she had established relationships who knew nothing about her past. And this was a really an unfortunate situation. So those kind of sort of non-legal consequences. I'm sure there are more. Uh, yeah. So thank God in 2013, and thank Ross Spano and Talicia Espinoza and some other advocates, survivor advocates who helped with this. Um, we were able to pass Section 943.0583, and that was the our Florida human trafficking victim expungement, or some people say expunction, we say expungement law. Um, and it was so much more monumental than I even could have imagined at the time. And we were, I think, the eighth state at that point to have some sort of criminal record relief law. Some other states had some laws, some of them weren't very good. Ours happened to be, on the first go around, happened to be really, really good. And I'm so thankful for that, because we've learned through the years how difficult it is to go back in and make changes. We were able to pass that law unanimously. I mean, the support for that law was incredible. I'm talking about stakeholders that you might otherwise think might oppose that sort of thing, from like law and order sort of perspectives. Everybody understood it, and everybody understood it was wrong for somebody to pay a price for something that someone else did to them. And so it really sailed through, and we were just so grateful. It was enacted in 2014. We did the first expungement in 2014, and we've been able to amend the law, which we'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. So yeah, just super thankful. And now we have 2014, 11 years of history using that law so very successfully. So there are other kinds of expungements in Florida, and we're not going to talk about those, except to say that the human trafficking expungement law under 943.0583 is very different than the other, what we'll call sort of standard or traditional or administrative expungements. And I'll talk about some of the differences, but the human trafficking expungement law is a substantive remedy, right? So, and by that I mean it's not just hiding a record, it's not just sealing a record. It is those things, but it's also affecting the underlying case, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few seconds. But so just the highlight of important advantages of the human trafficking expungement law is it vacates any conviction that's associated with the expunged record. And when we first passed this and we were calling it an expungement law, we were getting feedback from, Polaris Project and from others that were like, why did you do an expungement law and not a vacature law? And we had to explain that, well, it is a vacature law. It's just that not every record needs to be vacated, right? You may have an arrest record that was dismissed, or maybe was never even charged, but you still have an arrest record and you still have to deal with that and expunge it. So this was sort of killing two birds with one stone. We expunge the record, and if there's a conviction related to that record, then that conviction gets vacated, and vacated on the merits, or vacated because it was seen as a mistake. It should not have been prosecuted. So that's not just an important difference. That's like everything. It's a huge difference. We'll talk about the implications of vacating a conviction in a few minutes. But the other thing is, compared to the other expungement provisions, the human trafficking expungement law only requires disclosure of the expunged arrest in only two instances. And one of them is if you are a defendant in a future criminal case which actually probably should not even be in there because it really should not be considered in even a future case. Or if you're applying for a job with a criminal justice agency. And if you look at the other expungement provisions and look at there are tons of situations where you have to disclose that arrest record, teacher's license. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Is a long list, and thankfully we were able to get it down to those two, and that's a really big difference. So, sometimes people will say, well, why not just use the regular expungement law if you've got like a misdemeanor, that there was no conviction, and so they'd be eligible to maybe expunge under that law, but they're not going to have the advantage of not having to disclose in a bunch of other situations. So, a really important distinction there. So let's talk about the process, and I know Danielle's going to she's probably champing at the bit here to to get involved, because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So we do have to you do have to determine whether somebody is eligible for the human trafficking expungement, right? So that is we'll get into a little bit of the details here, but we gather information generally in writing. We do a short phone interview, and a lot of this depends on where our client has come from. So if they've been referred by a law enforcement agency, and a law enforcement agency has made a determination that they were a trafficking victim, and maybe this person has participated in the investigation or the prosecution of her or his trafficker, we don't usually have to get a lot of information. And that saves, the one big thing that saves is putting them through another information gathering situation where they have to talk again about what happened to them. So I've had clients, and currently have clients where I know very little actually about their trafficking background, because I don't need to know it. Again, it's been certified by law enforcement. Everybody on the planet that's had anything to do with this client knows that she was a trafficking victim. So there's no need for me to dig into that. But sometimes we do have to dig into that, and which is unfortunately really the more common situation. So we do gather that information in writing, and as to their background, their trafficking situation, their vulnerabilities, kind of everything. That it's really their story. It's really sort of their life story. So, Robin, I see you on here.
Yeah, someone asked really quickly, could you go back and mention, it says, the question is, I missed when you need to disclose that you had your record expunged when it comes to applying for jobs?
Okay, sure. Yeah, under the human trafficking expungement law, only two instances, and one is if you are a defendant in a future case, and the other is if you are applying for a position with a criminal justice agency. So those are the only two. So, I have clients that are Florida bar members and went through the process, and they were technically not required to disclose. The bar examiners don't totally agree with me on this, but in my view, they're not legally required to disclose. So, but those are the two.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so we're gathering information. We have to determine where to file, right? So you have a case, let's say you have a client that has, 20 cases, and 10 of them are in Miami-Dade County, and 10 of them are in Broward County. Well, we know the Broward County cases are going to go well, and no, you just have to determine where to file. And if you're a lawyer out there and you're thinking about, well, where should I file first? There's a strategic reason sometimes to file in a in a county that gets this. And the reason is if you get an expungement order out of, let's just say Broward County, then you can use that order as official documentation that tends to show that your client was a trafficking victim. You can use that order then in a county that may be not as knowledgeable and that sort of thing, but it then creates some legal presumptions, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So sometimes there's a strategic reason to go in a particular jurisdiction first, but sometimes you just file it in all of them at the same time. And so that determination where to file is really important. Are we in circuit court or county court? Depending on if they're all misdemeanors, you're going to file in county court. Does an administrative order in that particular jurisdiction funnel all human trafficking expungements to a particular judge or to a particular division? So that may affect which case you file in. If it doesn't, you may look for a judge you are familiar with, because you can file all of these with a single court. You don't have to file them in separate courts or the courts of original jurisdiction. So that determining where to file can be a really important aspect. If it's only one case, then it's a lot easier. But most often it's not just one case. We're going to prepare pleadings, documents, all the things that need to be filed. We're going to take that information that we've gathered and assist the survivor with creating a sworn statement, which again is this sort of life story to help the state, the prosecutor and the court understand what has happened to them, maybe what happened to them in childhood, what the vulnerabilities were, what the trafficking situation or situations became. So that sworn statement is really important. The statute doesn't require all of those details. The statute has very, very minimum couple of things. You're just saying you believe, to the best of your knowledge, you're eligible for expungement. And I think that's it. It used to be another requirement that you didn't have another expungement in process, but we got that removed. But that doesn't really help. That really doesn't help the state kind of understand what happened. Again, if it's a documented case, a different story. But if it's an undocumented or don't want to confuse that with immigration, but if it's a case that doesn't have documentation of the trafficking, then you're going to have to. You just have to. And so that again is where, where you're filing it and who's reviewing it is really everything in this process. And so we file a petition package and we wait for the state's response. And God willing, we've got the next step is a proposed order to expunge.
So if you want, I can go in, I can talk about kind of what my process is when I get those packets.
Please.
And a quick question before, maybe you could answer it, to just bounce off something Brent just said and then go to you, Danielle. The question is, what if clients have human trafficking arrests in more than one state? What do you do in those cases? And then someone asked a general question, and I don't remember that this is in the slides, but the number of survivors whose records have been expunged versus those who have sought expungement and have been seen as not eligible.
So I know I have many cases, and I have lots of victims, and I have victims who survivors who have been trafficked throughout the United States. And like Brent said before, Florida has good, strong laws about human trafficking expungements because of the work that Mr. Woody has done. Not all states are up to speed. And that's going to be the struggle that a lot of survivors deal with, is that, they may be able to get their cases expunged in Florida, but not in Ohio. And I think at least for what I do, is I'll send some emails. Hey, does Mr. Woody, Miss Sexton, do you guys have any contacts in this jurisdiction to assist with that survivor? And then I stay out of it because I don't have any business dealing with Ohio or any other state. I just try to get that person connected with the right people, and then hopefully the laws in that state are similar to ours, and then they can get it expunged. And then your next question was the amount of people who get expungements versus do not get expungements. I'm very proud to say that every single one that has been presented to me that I've been able to review, and like I said, I'll kind of go through what my process is here in a second. I've approved every one of them. And I think mostly that's because the people that bring them to me do their job, and they're not presenting frivolous petitions to me. They know that their survivor is in fact a true human trafficking survivor. Because that's their part of their reputation. They're not going to put their reputation on the line. And so I can trust that. But usually, as soon as I get that package, it comes in through my email. It's either a personal email, hey, Danielle, we're going to file this. Here's the paperwork. Or it gets filed in the clerk system. And then I get an email triggering that there's been a filing. So the first thing I do is I look at the case numbers. What are the case numbers that we're trying to expunge? And then I go into my internal system, and if it's an old case, I'll automatically just request the file from our archives. If it's not too old, a lot of our stuff has been scanned into our internal system. So I'll just go through and I'll read the facts of the case. I want to understand what was happening at the time of this arrest. Sometimes you can read between the lines and you're saying, oh, it's an arrest for prostitution, and this person was being driven by this person, this other person. You can kind of read between the lines and figure out exactly what was going on. In other cases, you can't. And so I do need more information. Once I can kind of, go through all of that, I will then, in Mr. Woody's case, I'll then read through the entire affidavit. And I will read through exactly what was happening during that period. And it's a lot. I mean, I've received packages with 10 pages of this survivor putting their heart into this affidavit, because obviously expungement is very, very important for them. And I read through the entire thing. Sometimes I'll read through it multiple times because I want to make sure, I understand exactly what was going on. And if I don't have any questions, it is a sworn affidavit. If I don't have any questions, if there's nothing that's left lingering, I approve. I will send my approval over to Mr. Woody, and then it gets sent to the judge. I let the judge's judicial assistant know that the state has no objection, and then we move. Mr. Woody moves on from there. In other cases, just like Mr. Woody said, it is not required that there is a full 15-page affidavit detailing the human trafficking incidents. It is very helpful for me. I will say that it is very helpful, but I also understand that can be very traumatic. And so what I have worked out with another attorney is that once I read through everything and I've pulled up the criminal history, I've pulled up the criminal cases, I say, let's schedule a Zoom conference. Let's schedule a meeting. It can be in person, it can be on Zoom. A lot of times it's on Zoom because these survivors have now moved out of state, or they're not in the jurisdiction anymore. They don't want to be, at least again, I'm in Broward County. They don't want to be in the area where they were trafficked. So they move. And I'm not going to have somebody fly down here to sit down and talk to me. So we do it over Zoom. It's a sworn statement. They have to raise their hand, swear to tell me the truth, all of that. And then I ask my questions. I ask the questions that I need to understand that this person was a victim of human trafficking at the time, because that's what the statute requires, right? So I'm just going to read it really quick, just this one section. A person who is a victim of human trafficking may petition for the expungement of a criminal history record resulting from the arrest or filing of charges for one or more offenses committed or reported to have been committed while the person was a victim of human trafficking, which offense was committed or reported to have been committed as part of the human trafficking scheme of which the person was a victim at the direction of an operator of the scheme. So I have to prove that when that person was arrested, committed that offense, whatever it was, that they were a victim of human trafficking at that time, or it was in furtherance of the human trafficking scheme. And so as long as I have a reasonable belief that that's what is happening, then yeah, I have no problem approving those petitions. But I do think it's important to move fast because these people are waiting. There's no reason not to review it right away. And I'm kind of a little OCD, so as soon as it comes across my desk, I don't like it when people are waiting on me for anything. So I try to get to it within a week. And there have definitely been instances where I've asked Mr. Woody, hey, can I talk to this survivor? And if that person's not ready, because sometimes they're not, sometimes they need time. They're not mentally ready to have that conversation, and we'll just wait and we'll hold off. Another thing that I wanted to say is another big part of the statute is that, and again, I'm going to read it as well. Petition under this section must be initiated by the petitioner with due diligence after the victim has ceased to be a victim of human trafficking or has sought services for victims of human trafficking. So sometimes, and actually recently, I got a human trafficking expungement package, and the case numbers were like 2022, 2023. It's pretty recent. And I'm sure everybody that's here, if you have worked with human trafficking survivors, it can be a years long struggle. And so it's kind of I'm not going to say a red flag, but it's a yellow flag. Are they still actively, being victimized? Are they still in this, and I don't want to say lifestyle, but, for lack of a better term, in that lifestyle? Are they getting the help that they need? And so that's usually my first question, like, where are you at now in your life? Because that's an important thing too. I have to be able to check those boxes to make sure that this person is not still actively in being victimized, and that they are, or at least seeking help for it. And a lot of times I'll get affidavits from service providers saying that this person is receiving counseling, and that's good enough for me. I don't need anyone to have to relive their experience or to have to, talk to me about what they're dealing with in therapy. I just need to know that it's happening, right? So I'm going to let you keep going, Brent.
Well, one more thing just to kind of build on, and there's two questions that kind of surround this, and I'm taking advantage of what you said, Brett, about let's keep this going like a conversation. So not every circuit has Danielle or a Danielle in it that is focused on these cases with the expertise you have, and I think there have been a couple of questions that have gotten to the idea of so what's the likelihood of success when you start one of these cases? And I would ask Danielle too, when you think about some of your colleagues in other circuits, have you seen a trend or any movement toward prosecutors being open to this, doing what you do? And or have you had those instances where maybe a prosecutor has prosecuted a victim of trafficking and just says, hell no, this is a case that I feel strongly about. Like, have you heard about things like that happening? And this is to get a couple of your questions. Somebody asked, too, about documenting whether the person has been trafficked in some way, but they're all kind of getting to this idea of how likely is success or not.
So, I mean, I'm sure Mr. Woody probably will be able to answer that question much better than I can because he has direct experience dealing with different circuits. I don't. I do have a lot of colleagues that I do speak to, but I think that in order for prosecutors to understand this, they have to kind of take off their prosecutor pants and put on their trauma-centered, victim-centered pants and kind of understand that because the way I try to treat it is if I knew that this person was being trafficked, if I was the one prosecuting that underlying offense, we'll say that it's a traffic offense. I get a lot of traffic offenses that I expunge and or that I approve for expungement. And I look at it and I'm like, well, would I prosecute them then, knowing that they were a victim of human trafficking and they were being forced to drive that vehicle? Would I prosecute them then? Probably not. So if that's the way I look at it, then that's an easy one for me to do. Um, I think that, I mean, I would love to be able to go to different circuits and kind of talk about how I treat them and how, how I think that they should be handled. And I think that it should be a more victim-centered approach. And I think that there's just a lot of misinformation in general about what human trafficking is. And so, a lot of people don't understand that, human trafficking survivors are not, that they're not the cute little 12-year-old that was, kidnapped off the side of the street and thrown in the back of a van. Like, sure, that could be human trafficking, but that's not always what our survivors look like. And, no one is perfect and everyone struggles. And, I think that maybe we should do some more training is what I think we should do.
You got some positive feedback and claps when you said that.
Oh, thank you. I also do want to, I see there's a question that says, an undocumented trafficking case is less likely to expunge than a documented case. One other thing that I will say is that I always ask, does this person want to speak to law enforcement? Because I mean, my goal is to get as many traffickers off the street as possible, right? And if I know that there is a trafficker out there, I want to prosecute them. I want them to be in jail. I want them to go to prison. I don't want them to continue to traffic anyone else. And so that's usually one of my first questions. Are you willing to cooperate with law enforcement? And many times at that point in their life, they say, sure, yeah. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have already moved on. They want to live their life. They do not want to be re-traumatized again. And I respect that. I don't like to, hinge whether or not I'm going to approve a human trafficking expungement on whether or not the survivor is going to cooperate with law enforcement. Will they? If they will, great. I want to help facilitate that. But if they don't want to, I'm never going to force somebody to do it and dangle an expungement over their head in order to get them to do it.
Yeah, wow, that's why you're on this you're on this Zoom, dude, because so many things you touched on there that are so important. I mean, the trauma informed, kind of victim centered, however you want to say that, approach that you come at it is not only, I think, really the best way to deal with this law. It's also obviously the best for a survivor that's on a recovery journey, or for you talk about old cases, and there are cases that are not in your system anymore. I mean, you get back in the 90s and that kind of thing, and somebody learns about this law, and they're like, yeah, I had this 10 prostitution charges or whatever, and the clerk's like, we didn't even have those case numbers, but they still exist because it's coming up on the Florida Department of Law Enforcement record, and it's coming up on their background checks. So that victim-centered approach is just one of many reasons we really love working with you, and it's kind of a model that I do wish you could go to other circuits and train. And I'm not saying that we have some other great prosecutors as well. So but
and this is actually getting to another question, Brent. I just want to say what I think you implied. Someone asked whether or not there's a waiting period or there's a time after which you cannot seek for a case to be expunged. Is there a waiting period, or can you go back as far as it takes?
no, yeah, you can. There's no time. The only due diligence is the only sort of vague time frame that the statute talks about, and that's in 11 years. That's never ever come up. But there are no time frames, no waiting periods, and we'll kind of get to this, but you don't have to wait for probation to end, or I mean, we have expunged cases that were mid prosecution, so there's not. I mean, prosecutors don't always like that, but the law does not put any sort of restrictions.
Yeah, and in fact, the law says without regard to the disposition of the arrest or of any charges.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter if it's a closed case, if it's been closed for many years. It doesn't matter if it's a brand new case. It doesn't matter if the person has active warrants for that case. Doesn't matter if there's a violation of probation on that case. So yeah, it's regardless of the disposition. So I think that that's really, really important to know.
And
Yeah.
that person could still be incarcerated, could still be in
Yeah.
detention, and it doesn't, so it looks like you've handled those cases as well. Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. So we got those questions answered. Thank you both.
Yeah, I will just say that what the question about whether or not a case without documentation is less likely to be successful, and it really depends. All of the cases we filed, I mean, we're about 99%. We've only had one case that is actually still being litigated. So we could, maybe that's not nine, that may be 100% because we're not counting that case. But anyway, um, uh, that's where sort of the best practice is for a prosecutor to talk with our client and in a victim-centered approach, but to since there's no documentation, and I get it, it's just a self-reporting affidavit, a sworn statement, which is not nothing, but um, a prosecutor talking with them about the situation and that sort of thing is really the way to navigate that. And some of our prosecutors do that, and they do a really good job of it. Some of them will look at the sort of totality of the circumstances. There may be letters from service providers and others that are sort of supporting this status as a human trafficking victim. So the answer to the documentation question is it isn't less likely, but it can be a heavier lift, and so it's an important consideration. I do want to also mention that if there's an arrest can happen outside of the trafficking situation. The question is, when did the offense occur, or when was the offense reported to have occurred? Because you can have somebody arrested a year after they get out of the trafficking situation, and we have those cases. So it isn't just the arrest, but it's sort of when did that situation occur? Okay. Let's see how we doing on time.
Well, we've only got about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes. Okay. Okay.
So, but more questions. I mean, people, I think we're getting questions for advocates who are non-legal folks as well as lawyers. But let me ask you this really quick. So there's a question about if the client has other criminal convictions unrelated to trafficking, not eligible here, right? So this is only if they're connected to trafficking. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, the offense that's eligible to be expunged has to have been related or have had a nexus to the trafficking.
There you go. And then a quick one. Are you familiar with the bond program that helps people to get jobs? That kind of gives this sort of, somebody has a bond so they can move forward. Is that, have you had any things regarding expungement helping or hurting somebody getting or not getting a federal bond so they can get a job?
I have not had that experience.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So that was a great segment there to talk about.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Please.
So just what if a client has other criminal convictions unrelated to trafficking? I think that I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. Like the offenses don't have to be trafficking related offenses. We just have to be able to show that this person was a victim during that offense, when that offense was committed. For instance, I looked at one where it was a possession of a concealed firearm, and I read the police reports. I read all the the information in the case. It was, to me, it had nothing to do with human trafficking. The fact that this person, that this survivor had a firearm on her, but I had a meeting with her, and she explained to me that she had just escaped from her trafficker and had the firearm on her because she was scared of him, because she was scared he was going to come after her. And I was like, yeah, that's related to human trafficking. That's definitely, she was clearly a human trafficking victim. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question, because yes, it does have to have some sort of nexus to human trafficking. the victimization of human trafficking, not necessarily a human trafficking related crime.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for that clarification. That is great.
Yep. That's perfect, because there are those situations, and we've had a couple of them where, the trafficker let the victim go home for Christmas, and then a battery occurred while they were at home for Christmas. And then, we're like, struggle a little bit with, what is that? Okay, is it the trauma from, you kind of go through that. There's no yes or no answer. Well, at the end of the day, I guess there's a yes or no answer on that. But those are things you do have to. Thankfully, it's not usually that difficult, but it is something you want to think about, and you don't want to be quick to write off those things and say, nah, that couldn't have been related or couldn't have resulted from, because, boy, I don't really want to get in the weeds here because we don't have time, but the statute does actually refer to um, uh, offenses that occurred as a result of trafficking, and that's a little different standard than offenses that occurred in the scheme of human trafficking. So but that's a longer conversation for another time. But yeah, so we've talked a lot about eligibility for expungement, and I'm not going to, because we don't have much time, I'm not going to spend any time on defining what a human trafficking victim is. I think most of us know that, but this statute requires that they have been a human trafficking under Florida law or as defined in federal law. So, and the two are not fully identical. Many things are the same, but there are some other important differences. And so you have to be, you kind of have to be aware of that. There is also, and I'll take this little bunny trail because I always do, and I think it's important to talk about. Technically, federal law requires the federal law defines prostitution essentially as human trafficking, as sex trafficking. And the language is sex trafficking. The term sex trafficking means recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, and so on of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. Notice it doesn't talk about coercion there. And later on in the statute, a victim of trafficking is someone subjected to an act or practice described in paragraph 12. That is sex trafficking under federal law. So I've never really invoked that because typically in prostitution situations we have the necessary coercion to show, but it technically doesn't require it. So I just say that. So if you have a prostitution case, I'll move on to this slide because I do want to talk about this real quick. If you have a prostitution case, but your client is saying, well, I didn't have a pimp, nobody was making me do this, and so on and so forth, it's not automatically not a human trafficking case. And again, thinking about federal law here, let's think about one-on-one adult sex trafficking, right? And this is a U.S. v. Zacharias case out of Ohio, which was a case involving a priest who, I'm sorry, terrible story, abused some boys. The boys became adults. The priest continued to provide them drugs, do this and that in exchange for sexual favors. The men at this point were addicted. So you had all the elements of a human trafficking case, and the government prosecuted accordingly. And so he's in prison for life for trafficking minors and adults. So you can have these one-on-one situations involving potentially violent sex buyers, where you have, again, the elements of human trafficking. We're not talking about whether or not this might be a prosecutable human trafficking case. The question is whether or not they're a human trafficking victim in those circumstances. Power-based human trafficking, I want to mention, where it's law enforcement. If you will have sex with me, I won't arrest you. Attorneys, I'll provide legal representation if you have sex with me. We have an attorney who's been in jail for a long time in Orlando. That exact situation. Physicians, I'll treat you for cancer if you provide nude pictures for me. Landlords, we talked about that earlier, others in position of power. So, got to look at these situations really carefully when you're screening, that you don't miss things that might otherwise be an actual human trafficking victim and eligible for relief, not just relief, but other sorts of benefits. And we talk about grooming too, real quick, because we grappled with this a long time ago. If somebody's being groomed for human trafficking, but there's never actually a commercial sex act worthy of a victim of human trafficking. And thankfully, that was answered in a federal case where if they're groomed or they're taught or whatever, instructed for the purpose of human trafficking, then they're a human trafficking victim. So it was a really important distinction that helped us understand that. Robin, I see you're unmuted.
Some great questions coming in. So, alluding back to what you said about how sometimes after an expungement, the record is not cleared or it still appears in other databases. So they're asking, like, what do you do when records have been expunged, but then someone goes someplace else and lo and behold, the employer or somebody's able to find that record or sees the record after it's been expunged. And what typically shows up in a background check after an expungement, what shows up typically when someone does a background check?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and it's something we deal with all the time. And I'm gonna do a quick shout out to Kim Curry, who is one of our nonprofit leaders in the state, who has a multi-decade, if I could say that, background in background screening. And so Kim jumps into these cases to help clear these records from like private commercial background check companies that fail to update their files, and so an employer runs a background check, or a property manager runs a background check, and this stuff pops up. It doesn't mean that it wasn't expunged, but it does mean that the background screening company didn't update their files. So that's a whole other post expungement thing, which we obviously don't have time to get into, but it is a problem. And so Florida does a really good job of getting everything off of Florida's records from a state standpoint. FDLE, great partner with us. We work with them virtually every day, and they're really good at removing these records. Department of Corrections removing prison records that may have been involved in the expunged cases. But these private companies, they just are not great at making sure that their records are updated. So if that happens, then we'll usually jump in with a correspondence to the employer or that sort of thing, say this record was expunged, and kind of deal with it that way. But yeah, and the other problem is the FBI on the national level, which we can't just go in and check. Those, we often don't know whether those records have been removed from the national database. So those are problems, and that's why when you get the order to expunge, it's a wonderful day of celebration, but it's not over. In some ways, it's sort of chapter 2 that's starting at that point.
Thank you.
Yep. So I want to make this distinction here real quick. So Florida and federal child labor trafficking requires force, fraud, or coercion for a child in a labor trafficking situation. Florida law does not require coercion. So it's really just a matter, and you have to look carefully at those cases. Not that you are probably expunging a lot of juveniles' records, but you might be, and there may be labor trafficking situations that happened in that scenario. We have a great case out of the 4th DCA that basically confirmed that, made that clear, so labor trafficking victims are often criminalized, but commonly overlooked, because we almost always talk about these situations in sex trafficking sort of circumstances. But the fact is, there is this this challenge in the labor trafficking field as well. And then labor trafficking is commonly part of sex trafficking enterprises, right? Somebody's forced to carry the trafficker's drugs or to drive. It's kind of what most of these non-prostitution cases really are forced labor cases, so forced criminality. So really important to look at those kinds of things. So for a mentally incapacitated victim, and that there's a statutory definition of who is mentally defective, and I really hate that term, but mentally defective or mentally incapacitated. But if they are, or they were at the time that they were trafficked, then coercion, you don't have to show coercion because they're treated as a child, as someone under 18 for the purposes of being a victim of human trafficking. And that can be really important.
I do want to jump in here because I'm actually investigating a case right now that this is what I would like to charge. And it's going to be difficult. Obviously, we're talking about expungement versus an actual charge for this. But in order for me to be able to prove that somebody was mentally defective or mentally incapacitated, I have to be able. We need doctor's reports. I need something more to show because the statute does define what those terms mean, and it's more than just mental health issues. Like you have to show that this person has the mental capacity of somebody younger than 18 years old. Or that they couldn't appreciate like what was happening to them. And so usually I would need like a doctor's report, and sometimes that can be difficult for somebody to have to go to the doctor to have the doctor say that, yeah, you're not operating at the right functionality that you should be as a, however old you are. Sometimes that can be hard to ask somebody to do that, but you're 100% right. This one is really good for me because I don't have to prove any kind of force, fraud, or coercion, even if they are over 18. So that's a good one.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, if you have documentation, if you have those things, if you don't, and the state pushes back on an expungement, then it's probably going to be a process that you're not going to want to go through. But there are instances when there seems to be sufficient documentation and the state's okay. So it's just something that needs to be on your radar if you're screening for this type of thing. I'm going to just blow through eligible offenses. So we know that there's a list of excluded offenses which are not eligible to be expunged. You can just see that they're largely more violent offenses. The problem that we have with that is the problem we have is if you're arrested for one of those violent offenses, but the state doesn't even charge for it, it's just an arrest, we still can't expunge it. And that's where we've been trying to change that law for 3 years, 3 sessions now. And it's really unjust. Because it could be a mistake, right? The law enforcement could just make a mistake. Oh, we arrested the wrong person. And we still can't do anything with that. So I just real quickly wanted to mention scheme because we've had some confusion, a little bit of confusion with one circuit about what was a scheme. Because our client had stolen some items from a department store, and they said, well, that's not part of the scheme of human trafficking. That was just something that they did. And first of all, I think that's wrong to begin with. It is part of the scheme, but they were stealing it for themselves. They weren't giving the stolen items to the trafficker. The problem is under federal law, the purpose of the scheme is to cause a person to believe that failure to perform an act would result in serious harm to or physical restraint of any person. That's the scheme. The scheme isn't, or the scheme can be other things like what's the trafficker's scheme? How am I going to make money? How am I going to use this person? That's a scheme as well. But under the law, the scheme is defined this way. And then what is serious harm pulls in all of the ways of coercion. So threats of harm, physical, non-physical, psychological, financial, reputational. It's sufficiently serious under all the surrounding circumstances to compel a reasonable person, and this is really important, of the same background and in the same circumstances, not you and me, but the person, the victim, who a childhood, everything rolling up into this moment of their background and in the same circumstances to perform or to continue to perform commercial sexual activity or labor services. So that those are really important things. If you have a prosecutor that's pushing back and saying, "Well, I don't really see how this is connected," um, again, we're traveling under Florida law and federal law, so that can be a really important thing. Okay, I want to jump to the misinformation piece that I promised I was going to get to. Gosh, there's so much. Because I didn't talk about fine refunds. Um, okay, misinformation. Just real quick, things that you might hear from a clerk of court or you might hear from a judge. This happens not infrequently. You must have a certificate of eligibility from FDLE. No, you do not have to have a certificate. This process has nothing to do with FDLE until you get the order to expunge. Then it has everything to do with FDLE. If you have a conviction, you can't expunge your record. We've already that's not a thing. You can only get one expungement in your lifetime. That is not true. You can go back and get more expungements, or you can get expunged multiple cases. You have to pay all your outstanding fines. Danielle talked about that earlier. We don't have to satisfy probation. None of that has to be done. If you were charged as a minor, you don't need to expunge your record. That's not actually true. You need to expunge your record. If you have warrants in other jurisdictions, you can't expunge Florida arrest. That is not the case. If your Florida criminal history doesn't show up in a background check, you don't need to expunge your record. You need to expunge your record if you have the opportunity. You need to do it. An expungement, this is a misinformation. Expungement does not eliminate unpaid fines and court costs. That's not true. The expungement, remember, it vacates the conviction, and the conviction is the basis for those fines. And so you got a due process issue if the state continues to try to charge you fines for a conviction that's been vacated. So really important. And we talked about the disclosure of your arrest record. So I skipped a bunch of things, but I think we're at that moment, Robin, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that you've got I wanted you to do us a favor too. I mean, this misinformation slide is so important because it's almost like a camel's nose under the tent kind of thing, because this happens all the time. People don't understand what human trafficking expungement is, right? So you could have the clerk of the county looking at you and giving you absolutely wrong information, right? And what should people do? Should they call you? I mean, how should either an advocate, a non-attorney advocate who's trying to figure this out and is getting these really important people saying no,
Yeah.
what should people do?
I mean, yeah, call us, email us. We deal with this all the time. We just had a thing, and unfortunately, well, I won't name the county, but it's a county we're all familiar with that was trying to charge us $5 for a certified copy of the order. And it's in the statute. There's no clerk cannot charge any fine, any cost whatsoever related to a petition to expunge. And we get this with confidentiality as well. And petitions to expunge and all related documents are automatically required to be sealed by the clerk. We don't even have to file a notice of confidential information, although we do, and even that doesn't always do any good. So we deal with it all the time. We're happy to field a call, say, hey, I'm getting this pushback. What do I do? If you're an attorney, go to general counsel for the clerk's office. That's especially if it's a confidentiality issue, because that's dangerous. And if that affidavit that's naming traffickers and all that is subject to public disclosure, that has to be dealt with like right away. But yeah, feel for any of this stuff, any technical assistance on any of this. Welcome people to reach out, and certainly referrals for expungements for non-attorneys. We're happy to do our best.
Yeah, we always, I know that we're very grateful to the survivors who attend these webinars. So yeah, think about it because I really, you never know when this issue is going to come up for you, even if it's been 20 years since there was a trafficking incident in your life. You could be applying for a job or, or whatever where you'll need this assistance. I wanted to remind folks that we've got 2 hours of CLE. I just reposted. Carly, thank you for doing that earlier, the course number, the title, 2 hours of general credit, and also certification credits in the criminal area are available to you. And if you have any questions, you can also contact Stack on that. I think we answered all the questions because we got through them during the course of. So thank you. And oh, thank you, Brenda. These trainings are helpful. I'm glad. I think that every time we have the opportunity to talk to experts like Danielle and Brent, we really get a sense of how much more common this issue is, how many more people are trafficked who may not even realize that they had been trafficked, as well as family members. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you for coming because we wouldn't do it if you didn't come. And people are learning stuff, and we thank you for that. Next month, September 3rd Friday. Gosh, I think it's the 15th, but I don't remember the exact date. But I want to help putting the event in for next month. And just y'all, if you want to just go ahead and register now, I'm telling you that this is going to be another important one. Brent mentioned the idea of what's going on with immigration now. We're going to have two experts who have spoken before, Daniela Donoso and Vanya Aguilar, who are experts here locally, are going to talk about the challenges of assisting people who are immigrants who are trafficked, sex and labor trafficked. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Danielle. Thank
Can
you
I
for
say one?
today.
Can I say
Yeah.
one last thing?
Yeah, of course. Go, go,
I
go.
just, I know we had clients on this call, and I just want to thank them for being part of it, and you're the reason we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're the reason, and all the others out there that we know can benefit from this law. I get a sense that we need to do an in-depth CLE just for lawyers somewhere, somehow. Maybe we'll do that in January. We'll figure it out, okay? Because having a cadre and an army, if you will, of trained lawyers to represent survivors on every task force showing up and saying, I want to do expungements, show me how. We'd love that. We absolutely need it. When you said 90% of survivors have a criminal record, that should blow all of our minds, right? Because that, and then if you recall from the program we did on financial exploitation, that and debt relief and clearing your credit record and how you do that, the lawyer in that one said there was no question in her mind that every single trafficking survivor has been also financially exploited. So these are things that make it so challenging for people to move forward. So thank you for paving the way so people can move forward in their lives and heal. And everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for showing up on a Friday afternoon. And we're going to see you next month, I hope. And again, take good care.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you.